This is plate tectonic video number 2. Make sure you fill out all the underlined spaces and the parts that you need to fill out on your own. We're going to start off talking about continental drift and then plate tectonics. Continental drift was first theorized by Alfred Wegener. He said that at some point all the continents were probably all together in a single landmass, like this here. And then they slowly drifted apart over time. They did not drift apart on the water, but on the magma, in the mantle. The supercontinent, he said, was Pangaea. He called it Pangaea. Now, his evidence, because you always have to have evidence of your theory, was that they found some fossils of the same plants and animals on different continents. And some of these plant and animals couldn't actually have crossed. Like, I don't know about a plant getting up and walking across or swimming across the ocean. Neither could a lizard. The plant's name was Glossopteris, and the animal's name was Mesosaurus. You need to know those for the test. The evidence of the theory of continental drift included also some rock layers that lined up. Now, in your notes, it has that part twice. The Glossopteris and the fossil part, just mark out the second one. The rock layers on different continents often also line up with the exact same type of rocks, even the layer lines, even between us and the North America and Europe. So here, for example, you see some of these fossil traces they found on all these different continents, which kind of proves his theory that they were once together. So right now, I want you to go ahead and I want you to give evidence based on the map above that supports continental drift. Now, Pangaea broke apart at one point. Here's a picture of what that might have looked like. Starting off here, first, second, third, fourth, and then now. Describe what happened to the continent known as Pangaea and this space right here. So we get that continental drift was a theory proposed by Alfred Wegener. Okay? Here's the learning check you're going to do for the first part of your Edmodo notes. I want you to go ahead and write this on a piece of notebook paper, and then you're going to upload it to Edmodo and the turn-in section for this assignment in a little while. First, choose a species from the diagram on page 3 and explain how its fossils were found on multiple continents. And then I want you to give examples of other evidences that scientists use to support the theory of continental drift. I also want you to list what examples of fossil evidence found on multiple continents would not support continental drift theory. Okay? Moving on. So here's a video you can watch about plate tectonics. Answer this question. This question here, if you have to live at one of the boundaries, which would you not want to live by and why, in your turn-in section for the notes. This is how you're going to get a grade for this activity. So let's talk about plate tectonics. So plate tectonics is when the surface of Earth basically is divided up into big, huge pieces called plates. Each plate has a name and is a part and attached to the lithosphere. These plates are continuous and they all fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. In the movie 2012, it was not scientifically accurate because it showed California breaking off and sliding into the ocean. That couldn't happen because at the bottom of California, beneath the ocean, it's connected to the ocean floor. The whole huge plate would have to lift up with the ocean on it, and that's not going to happen. So these pieces float on top of the asthenosphere like ice cubes in a bowl of water. Here is a picture of these plate boundaries. Here's where California is. That's why so much activity happens there. Volcanic and earthquakes. Now there are several different types of plate boundaries. The convergent boundaries are plates that move towards each other. So I want you to write the word convergent. Make sure you put 3 main types of boundaries. Next to the word convergent, I want you to draw 2 arrows that point towards each other, like you see in the picture. Plates are moving towards each other. If you want to make up a hand signal for yourself, that'd be great. Now the denser, where the more atoms are closely packed, plates subduct or go under other plates. So subduct is like subway, under the ground. Other words, the sub means under. Okay, sub basement. The word subduction is when one plate sinks beneath another plate back into the mantle. This actually allows the lithosphere then to melt and recycle that part of the Earth's crust, which means we never ever get new rocks. They've always been melted and turned into other rocks. So this subduction only happens at a convergent boundary. Looks like this. It sinks under. There's another visual for you about how that produces volcanoes as a result. So the next type is divergent boundaries. Divergent, I want you to write the word divergent and then draw two arrows that go away from each other. So these plates are moving away from one another. Okay? Now, lava pools up in between there, but it's not like you're going to fall into a trench that's a billion miles deep into the mantle. That doesn't happen. And then last we have transform boundaries. These plates are sliding past one another. Make sure you draw those arrows. So you're going to create a diagram in the space below with the squares that helps you remember each boundary. Remember, diagrams include arrows. Now here are some important features. You must remember these. You want to know them. The San Andreas Fault runs down the California coastline. This is where all the action happens for San Francisco and all that. And this is part of a transform boundary. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge is the longest chain of underwater mountains. This is that place where they dropped Megatron in Transformers 1. It creates part of the biggest trench in the world. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, because inside of a ridge or next to a ridge you're going to find a trench. These are at divergent boundaries, boundaries that pull apart or divide. I think convergent comes together, divergent divides apart, transform slides past. Here's another visual for you. Now, in the chart on the right side on page 7, you're going to fill these out. What happens, the landforms that are created, and then the diagram. You're going to have to do something similar on the test because there's each different subsections for each different type of boundary. So at a convergent boundary, when oceanic and continental plates come together, the oceanic plate sinks under the continental plate. If I were you, I'd just draw myself an arrow that shows that. And this creates a continental shelf or a trench, kind of like Finding Nemo, that big continental shelf where Nemo's mom died. Something similar. Next you have a convergent boundary that's oceanic. This causes the two plates to push into each other, and you end up getting an underwater trench, or you could also get a mountain range. And this kind of stuff happens over hundreds of thousands of years. This is nothing that happens like over a weekend. The last type of convergent boundary is continental. When two plates crash into each other, it's very similar to a car crash, and it creates mountains as a result. Volcanoes can also form in those situations as well. This is where you get that subduction. Here's a visual of that happening. These two plates come together. This plate is actually sinking beneath this plate. So eventually India will be gone. Now at a divergent boundary, plates pull apart, a new rock forms, and an underwater trench happens. So you get underwater trenches form and volcanoes, and then on land you get faults trenches, and volcanoes. You should know at least one example for each of these. Just know that a divergent boundary divides apart. Here's an example of that. Eventually, the Red Sea is going to blend completely with the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. And there's also one that runs directly beneath Iceland, and that's part of the reason why they had that huge volcano not too long ago there. You can find out more information about that on YouTube. So transform boundary is when the two plates build up pressure, like your hands are pressing against each other and they slide past. This actually causes earthquakes. When those slip past each other, the kinetic energy from the slip is what causes the different continents to produce an earthquake. Now, when an earthquake happens underwater or close enough to water, it's kind of like you slapping the water under the pool, in the bathtub, slapping the water. You get a wave. We call that a tsunami. So here's your learning check. You're going to complete 3 learning checks whenever you turn in these notes. The one for continental drift, the one for plate tectonics, and then the one for plate boundaries. So this one says, could convergent and divergent boundaries be considered opposites? Why? Could convergent and transform boundaries be considered opposites? Why? And then how does the density of an oceanic and continental plate compare to one another? Look forward to seeing your work. Thanks a lot.